There was a study recently that showed that people on the radical progressive left are just as authoritarian as people on the right can be.
Sure.
And what happens when they're confronted with evidence that challenges their beliefs, they tend to ignore it. And I think you see that with the Labour Party. I mean, if you try and make the argument that what they are creating through mass immigration, by failing to control the borders, by pandering to, let's say, radical, if not extreme groups, they're creating a very divided, low-trust society. That's exactly what New Labour did, by the way. Much of this goes back to New Labour and the legal architecture that they put in to Britain's political system. A lot of this, I think, goes back to the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act, the Supreme Court, New Labour's kind of insistence that supranational institutions like the European Union and others should always dominate and be supreme over our national law and over ourselves as a sovereign, self-guiding nation. And if you look at the legacy of things like the Human Rights Act or the European Convention on Human Rights, which has a longer lineage, that's why we can't control our borders. So we're now getting at the point where neither Labour nor the Conservatives will commit to overturning any of that stuff. And so by extension, they won't commit to controlling our own borders. I mean, the only people who will are Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. So that is the clearest dividing line that we now have in British politics between what you might call the uniparty that is indistinguishable on a lot of these issues and Farage and Reform.
Regarding Farage and Reform, are we seeing a turning point, particularly among the youth?
I think we're seeing a turning point in this country more generally. I think we are on the cusp of a full-blown political realignment in Britain of the kind that America has just seen, but which has been building in this country for the last 15 years. So like my sort of bird's eye view of British politics is that, you know, with Farage and the UK Independence Party in the 2000s leading up to the Brexit referendum, you kind of had the beginning of this realignment. You then had the Brexit vote, which sort of brought it to the surface, made it unavoidable. Everybody realized that, oh, crikey, there are millions of people in this country that do not support the status quo, that do not support the elite consensus, that want a radically different vision of who we are. The Conservatives at that point had a unique opportunity to lean into that, like Donald Trump has done. They completely fumbled that. They diluted Brexit. They softened it up. They pushed the pedal down on mass immigration. They put it on steroids. They didn't really give a monkeys about the British people. They did what they want to do. That's what Tories always do. And they lost the realignment. Now, the story might have ended there. But actually, what happened in 2024 is the British people came back to the table and they said, we're not quite done with this realignment. We're going to give Nigel Farage 4 million votes. We're going to give him what he's not had before, 5 MPs in Parliament. We're going to give him a voice in the national political arena. And I think actually we're going to see how far we can push this thing and try and reshape the whole system. So as we're talking now in December 24, what have you got in the polling? You've got Reform on 25%. So they're up 10 points on the election in July. You've got Labour on 26%, you've got the Tories on 23%, you've got a two-party system becoming a multi-party system, and you've got millions of people out there saying, I don't want left or right anymore. I don't want Labour and the Tories. I don't want this society that I see around me. I don't want this managed decline. I don't want all of this immigration. I don't want soft on crime policies. I don't want two-tier policing. I don't want an economy that just works for London. I would quite like to live in a country that I respect, that keeps me safe, that I'm proud of, and that puts my interests first. That is why Farage is back at the forefront of British politics. That is why he is now the most influential politician, I would argue, of his generation. I think Reform, if they get it right, you know, all political realignments are about demand and supply. You have to have the demand, but you have to have a party that can supply that with a credible, coherent, compelling message. I think if Reform get that bit right and they kind of lock into this demand, I think the next 5 years could deliver a political earthquake on a scale this country has never seen really since Labour replaced the Liberals. I mean, I think Reform could go further than the SDP, the Social Democrats in the 1980s, which came close to replacing the Labour Party. I actually think Farage and Reform could go much further because we are in this civilizational moment. And by that, I mean you and I aren't even talking about policy, really. What we're talking about is a sense that we both have, and I think many viewers will have it too. We have a sense that our civilization here is on the table, that we actually want to save a country that we both knew and loved, but which for different reasons, maybe we suspect is now beginning to, the survival of that country is beginning to be, questioned and may not be guaranteed. And so for reform, the big message I think that many people are sending by voting for it is actually, no, we want our country back. We want to save our country. And I think that's where Farage is getting a lot of his headwind.